Having already reviewed the new Tesla Model 3 long range, I was curious to see how the entry-level model would compare. Indeed, the rear-wheel drive model, at least at the time of filming and in the UK, is £10,000 cheaper than its all-wheel drive sibling, coming in at just shy of £40,000. So in this review you can see if it's actually worth its price tag and how it compares to some of its competitors. But before proceeding, I would just like to thank AWD for actually sponsoring this video. More on them a little bit later. So to kick things off, let's talk about its electric range. And here the manufacturer does not provide any sort of concrete information about its battery pack, although it is presumed to be sat between 57 to 60 kilowatt hour. Now there is a 318-mile WLTP claim, which is an improvement over the previous generation model, and there is also a heat pump that comes included as standard, which is certainly appreciated. Some of its competitors do not offer it as standard and indeed include it as an option, which I do find somewhat ridiculous. Now nonetheless, from my own mixed driving tests, I netted 225 to 245 miles from the entry-level model. Now this is quite similar to last generation's model, and indeed as you'll be able to see over here via the mileage leaderboard, it doesn't actually fare too badly. Although it's worth noting that there are some other alternatives out there, namely from the likes of BYD and Volkswagen, that actually fare a little bit better. This is due to the fact that they have got a larger battery pack. Now for those people with a keen eye, you will be able to notice that the Model 3 Highland long range is actually ranked a little bit higher now. And the reason behind this is actually because I retested it. Now this is due to the fact that the initial review of the long range model was using a software that was miscalculating the range, therefore giving me a quoted range of 270 to 290 miles. However, when it came to retesting the vehicle, it seems that everything has been ironed out. And now I'm netting over 310 to 330 miles, which is certainly impressive and in line with what I would have expected with the new Highland long-range model. Now for you to be as efficient as possible, there is regenerative braking, and this is actually done automatically. For you to enable it, you simply have to lift off the accelerator pedal, which I'm doing right now. Now the vehicle will actually come to a complete standstill. In other words, it does have a full one-pedal drive, and that's very much appreciated. However, it would have been great if there was a means of customizing it via the infotainment system, as it was previously available in the older generation Tesla Model 3, or indeed, like some of its competitors, offer a degree of customization, be it via the use of flappy paddles or via the infotainment system, for you to, for example, tinker around with the low, medium or high preset, for example. But alas, that's not the case, at least not at the time of filming and in the UK. Now of course you do have the ability of plugging it in, and here via its CCS port it'll take up to 170 kilowatts of input, which is down from 250 kilowatts from the all-wheel drive model. Nonetheless, both vehicles will take roughly 25 to 30 minutes to go from 0 to 80%. Now the entry-level model also has an 11 kilowatt onboard charger, and due to its slightly smaller battery pack in comparison to the all-wheel drive model, will take you roughly 6 to 7 hours to go from 0 to 100% when of course plugged into a 3-phase power supply. As for a 3-pin input, it will take you a whopping 35 hours to attain the same amount of charge. Now I would also like to point out that in comparison to some of its modern rivals, the Tesla Model 3 still does not support any sort of vehicle-to-load charging. In other words, you cannot discharge the battery pack to, for example, another EV or of course a household appliance, which would have been handy, for example, if you go camping. Speaking about charging, this perfectly brings me on to today's sponsor, AWD, a free app that enables you to share your charging experience and even regularly rewards you. AWD is the most trusted platform for rating public chargers. By contributing to the app, you're helping others to find the best charge points and also actively improving the charging infrastructure by providing key information to operators such as BP Pulse and Source London, among many others. Better still, the app is fun to use as you can compete with others by earning points. All that's required is to sign up using an email, so all your data remains anonymous. If you download the AWD app using the link below, you'll even get some starting credit. So moving on from efficiency, let's talk about performance. And yet again, there is no official data that's been provided by the manufacturer, although it's presumed that there is roughly 200 to 250 kilowatts of power that is produced by the rear-mounted motor, and of course when combined with its battery pack, you'll get roughly 350 to 420 Newton meters of torque. Now what I can provide is some official data using RaceLogic's Performance Box Touch, because I had it tested from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 1.91 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 2.85 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in 6 seconds, which is a little bit below the claimed 5.8 seconds, and of course is not as fast as the all-wheel drive model, which attained this same sort of figure in 4.29 seconds, and it got from 50 to 70 miles an hour in 2.69 seconds. I also recorded a peak acceleration of 0.59 Gs. Its top speed is rated at 125 miles an hour. Now, another important factor is braking performance, and here I do feel that the entry-level Tesla Model 3 does actually feel pretty good. And indeed over here, the front and rear disc brakes and pads do a decent job. The same sort of comments were not said about the all-wheel drive model, which is actually a little bit heavier due to its battery pack, and of course a lot more powerful due to the secondary motor. With that said, the long-range model has got an all-wheel drive configuration, therefore giving you a degree of confidence when you're going around winding country routes or if you're faced with wetter tarmac. Still, the rear-wheel drive model does not suffer from any sort of wheel spin and still feels pretty well planted on the ground. As for the overall driver's feels, you've got a good sort of sense of connection with the front axle, although it's not going to quite compete with sportier alternatives, namely from the likes of BYD, Polestar or BMW. Still, in the grander scheme of things, I do think it will suffice for most consumers and will leave a lot of people with a smile on their face. As for its suspension system, I did feel that the rear-wheel drive model actually fared a little bit better in comparison to the all-wheel drive model, and this could be just due to the fact that it's actually lighter due to a smaller battery pack and the omission of a front-mounted motor. Indeed, over here it actually felt pretty comfortable when going around winding country routes without not finding too much body roll, and it also soaked up a lot of the potholes and speed bumps when going around town. Although make no mistake, it's not going to compete with more advanced and far more expensive alternatives out there on the market, which use an adaptive air suspension system. Now, another thing that impacts the overall driving experience is cabin noise, and thankfully over here the new Tesla Model 3 does do a tremendous job. The same could have been said about its predecessor, but still great to see that the Highland model has still got that serene in-cabin experience. You've also got updated use of materials around the dashboard, the door trims, and even in terms of the upholstery. In fact, you've also got an ambient lighting system which gives you a degree of customization and personalization. However, it's worth noting that in my opinion, the overall look and feel of the interior doesn't quite compete with some of its modern competitors, which have really upped the ante. And indeed over here, the alternatives from Smart, Polestar, BMW, BYD or even Hyundai have really offered a compelling alternative. Now, what you will find in the Model 3, very much like any sort of Tesla, is a minimalist design, which some people will love or hate. And this is due to the fact that you have got a 15.4-inch display that's planted at the center of the dashboard. Now, it's very intuitive and super responsive, and in fact all your controls are done directly through it. And this also includes your drive mode selector. Indeed, you'll swipe up to go into drive, swipe down to go into reverse, and tap to park or go to neutral. It's actually quite intuitive while you get your head around it, but of course does take a little bit of getting used to. Now, you might be wondering what happens if the screen ever fails. Well, thankfully here the automaker has thought about it and included a few buttons positioned towards the headliner, meaning you can still drive the vehicle. Now, what is disappointing, however, is the fact that Android Auto and Apple CarPlay have still been omitted, which is quite surprising in this modern era, with all of its competitors actually offering it as standard. This might of course come in at a later date, but there is no certain official word on it. Now, this means that you cannot play back audio at a higher quality playback from your smartphone, nor use your favorite navigation service. You'll have to rely on the Google Maps integration via the infotainment system, and of course, playback audio from your smartphone at the lowest quality Bluetooth codec, which is SBC. You have of course got the ability to subscribe to premium connectivity for £10 a month, and therefore gives you access to the likes of Tidal, Spotify and Apple Music, among a few others. Now, when it comes to the overall audio system, as standard, you've got a 9-speaker configuration on the entry-level model, but this does move over to a pretty impressive 17-speaker configuration in the all-wheel drive alternative. What I'll say is the all-wheel drive model does do a tremendous job across the sound frequency range, while the entry-level 9-speaker system still does do a pretty good job, specifically if you consider its overall price tag. In fact, if you want a detailed breakdown of the audio system and the in-cabin measurements, make sure you check out my dedicated audio review that can be found up on your pop-up banner, or by following the links down in the description below or the pinned comments. Another impressive trait which I absolutely love is the Tesla app, which is super responsive and intuitively laid out. It also gives you certain controls from afar, such as preconditioning the cabin. You've also even got the ability of using this smartphone as a wireless key, which can be handy in certain scenarios. Now, what I don't like, however, is that you still do not have a head-up display, even available as an option like you'd find on some rival alternatives. And due to that minimalist design, you still don't have an instrument cluster, meaning that when you want to be checking your traversing speed or the safety systems that are in operation, you have to take your eyes further away from the road and look diagonally towards the 15.4-inch infotainment system. Now, what is a major safety concern for myself, at least for someone who drives in the UK and Europe, is the fact that you've no longer got any sort of indicator stalks. And as such means that you have to be faffing around by pressing a button on the steering wheel. Now, this is actually quite problematic when you're going around a roundabout, such as when you're indicating right on a roundabout, and then when you want to get off the roundabout and you want to indicate left, you have to find a button. Sure enough, you might be able to find and remember where the button is located, but it still is not as intuitive to use as a traditional stalk. Furthermore, the overall longevity of these buttons is questionable, because certain Model S Plaid owners have already mentioned that their buttons are not as responsive as they used to be when they first bought the vehicle. And therefore I dread to think how this would be on the Tesla Model 3, which is actually going to be used by the masses. But I'll be curious to know what you make of the removal of the indicator stalks of the updated Tesla Model 3 Highland down in the comment section below. Now, the removal of those physical stalks does actually have a benefit, and that is the amount of spaciousness that you feel when you're sat within the cabin. And this perfectly brings me on to storage. Now, towards the center console, you've got two high-speed wireless chargers, which are actually slightly angled and also lined in fabric, and therefore means that your smartphone is not going to be flying backwards when you put your foot down to the metal. Further down, you've got two retractable areas, one of which is actually pretty large and has actually got fabric material within it, and also a 12-volt socket for providing power. Then further down, you've got two cup holders, and then a very large armrest area where you'll also find a high-speed 65-watt USB Type-C port, which is used for providing charge only. You'll find a further two USB Type-C ports towards the rear of the center console. Now elsewhere, you have got the glove box, which is relatively thin, although it's got a magnetic design, therefore meaning that it feels a little bit more premium over the previous generation model. You've also still got that security thanks to the use of a PIN code. In terms of the door bins, the front two are large enough to accommodate a 500ml bottle, while the rear two are a little bit more limited. But it's fantastic to see that all four door bins are lined in fabric, and therefore any sort of loose change or keys will not be heard rattling about when you're traversing uneven terrain, a certain trait that cannot be said about a lot of its rivals. As for the rear of the cabin, you've also got a pull-down armrest compartment which reveals two cup holders. Of course, you do also have its boot, and here you have got a whopping 594 litres to play around with, or if you drop down the seat, an unofficial figure of 1,300 to 1,400 litres. In other words, it's actually pretty large to say the least. I also love the fact that you've got an electric tailgate that comes fitted as standard, although it's not got that hatchback design, making it potentially a little less practical in comparison to some of its competitors. Nonetheless, you've got a flat loading bay, 60-40 rear split folding seats, and an absolutely humongous underfloor compartment, which will not only suffice for your charging cables, but also certain shops. Although it's worth mentioning over here that you have not got an integrated ski latch, and also given its design, there is no bootload cover, but that doesn't really bother me in the slightest. Now elsewhere, at the front of the vehicle, you've got an 88-litre compartment, also referred to as a frunk. Now it's electronically open, be it via the app or indeed via the infotainment system, but has to be manually closed, which in my opinion is a slight mistrick, as it means that if you do access the front of the vehicle regularly, it becomes a little bit more cumbersome. So past storage, let's talk about in-cabin comfort. And here you have got a panoramic glass roof that comes included as standard, which is absolutely fantastic to see, as it draws in some extra light within the cabin and gives you that sense of spaciousness. It is worth noting, however, that you have got UV blocking rays, but if you do want a sunshade, you can purchase that as an additional extra. Now, as for the seats themselves, they're very accommodating and soft, both at the front and rear of the cabin. As someone who's just under 6 foot, I had no problems whatsoever while even sat in the rear middle seat. It's also great to see that you have got a completely flat footwell design, which isn't the same that could be said about some of its competitors. Furthermore, the front two seats have got electronic controls, including lumbar support, and are heated as standard. You've also got a heated steering wheel. As for the rear seats, the outer two are heated, but it's worth pointing out that the rear middle seat is no longer heated, unlike the previous generation model. Now that might come as a disappointment to certain individuals, but that might be quickly forgotten when you realize that there is a high-resolution 8-inch display, which can be used for your climate controls and even for entertainment for your rear occupants. A great inclusion specifically at this price point. Similarly, it's fantastic to see that it's very easy to exit the vehicle. Very much like other Tesla vehicles out there, by a simple press of the button, the door will open. Of course, it will not initiate while you're on the move for safety reasons. On that note, in an emergency situation, you can use the emergency door release. However, when it comes to entering the vehicle, it might take a little bit of getting used to, due to the fact that the door handles are concealed within the vehicle's frame, and therefore takes a little bit of a technique. Nonetheless, when you get your head around it, it will become second nature. Although I do think that in comparison to some of its rival alternatives that use traditional or indeed slightly different style door handles, they're a little bit more intuitive to use in completely pitch-black scenarios. Now I would also like to highlight that there is a pressure sensor that's located within the driver's seat, and therefore when the driver does sit within the main seat, it will power on. However, when they leave, you will find that the vehicle does power off. Thankfully, however, anyone who sat within the cabin can simply tap on the front or rear display in order to power on the entertainment or indeed the climate controls. Now moving swiftly on, let's talk about its exterior design. And here, very much like the all-wheel drive model, I've got no complaints whatsoever. In fact, I do feel that the manufacturer has updated its overall look. At the front, it kind of reminds me of a Ferrari 296 or Roma. But of course, looks are very subjective, so I'd be curious to know what you make of the updated model down in the comment section below. As for its side, you've got body-coloured wheel arches and side skirts, and you've also got 18-inch alloys that come fitted as standard. However, the pictured 19-inch Nova wheels will set you back an additional £1,500. As for colour, it comes in white. However, if you want a blue or black finish, it will cost you an additional £1,300, while the red or grey finish will cost you a whopping £2,000. As for its towing capacity, at least with a tow hitch installed, which will cost you £1,300, it has a rating of 1,000 kilograms for a brake trailer and 750 kilograms for an unbrake trailer. So next up we get onto safety, and here it scored 5 out of 5 stars on Euro NCAP's crash test, scoring a whopping 96% in adult occupancy, 86% in child occupancy, and 94% in its safety assist scores. Indeed, it does actually fare very well. Better still, you've got a plethora of driver assistance systems that come featured as standard. Now there is lane departure warning, which will come enabled every single time you power on the vehicle, and you'll have to faff around with the infotainment system if you want to disable it, which does seem a little bit more cumbersome. Nonetheless, you have got emergency lane departure avoidance, automatic blind spot camera, which effectively integrates the camera-based systems directly into the infotainment system, showing your surroundings. Then you've also got a blind spot collision chime, and even a blind spot indicator, which integrates itself within the mirror triangle. Then you've also got forward collision warning, which I did feel a little bit too sensitive, automatic emergency braking, speed assist, driver drowsy warning, and adaptive cruise control with auto steer, the latter doing absolutely a phenomenal job on the motorway, keeping you a safe distance from the leading vehicle and taking away the stress on those mundane motorway drives. Now, if you do want to better the experience, you can go for the enhanced autopilot package at £3,400, and this will give you navigate on autopilot and auto lane changing capabilities. I do think it's a little bit more redundant in the UK and Europe. Furthermore, the same could be said about the full self-driving package, FSD for short, at £6,800, and this will give you traffic light and stop sign recognition and auto steer on city streets. Finally, we get onto parking and visibility, and here the manufacturer removed the ultrasonic sensors from the Highland model. In other words, the front, side and rear parking sensors, in favour for something called Tesla Vision, which effectively uses a camera-based system to give you a heat map of your surroundings. You can see it in action at lower speeds via the infotainment system, and it's actually pretty cool. Now initially when I tested the all-wheel drive model, it was pretty hit and miss, but thankfully, due to some firmware updates, it's actually been massively improved. Still, I would have preferred ultrasonic sensors to be working in conjunction with Tesla Vision to give me the utmost sense of security. Speaking of which, you have actually got side cameras and also a rear-facing camera that comes included as standard, which isn't the same that could be said about some of its rivals. As for visibility, the frontal vision is actually pretty good, although you've got pretty chunky A-pillars. You've got a pretty nice window towards the side and also at the rear. Although it's worth noting that you have not got a wiper, nor do you have any sort of washer jets for any of the cameras. As for the overall turning circle, it's rated at 11.7 meters, which therefore means that the vehicle is actually pretty easy to maneuver. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to our verdict. And truthfully, the entry-level Tesla Model 3 Highland does tick quite a few boxes. In fact, in many ways, it's near on identical to its all-wheel drive sibling, other than the fact that it's operating on a rear-wheel drive configuration, has a shorter electric range, doesn't have the same amount of performance, nor the upgraded audio system. But considering it's £10,000 cheaper, it's certainly something that you should look at, and as such, it still gets our Best Buy awards. Now do consider, however, there are a plethora of alternatives out there on the market, some of which we reviewed and will be down in the description below for your own consideration. Now these vehicles will give you a head-up display, an instrument cluster, Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, and those indicator stalks, and some will even give you an adaptive air suspension system or even a heightened sense of feel. Now, we'll be curious to know if you would pick the Tesla Model 3 over some of its rivals down in the comment section below. And of course, it goes without saying that if you have enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.